perceiving and experiencing the world in whatever medium or genre. And I think that the beauty of exhibitions is their ability to help us connect the dots. I think that factor XX does just that. It challenges the viewer to slow down, to look a little bit more closely in order to see things that might not immediately be apparent. That happens with the individual works in the exhibition, I think, but more rewardingly, I think it also happens between the works. And what I'm imagining is that over there in that museum, there's an incredibly lively dialogue going on between those works. That if a viewer leaves themselves open to it, they can eavesdrop on that conversation and really kind of look around and begin to hear that dialogue. So I want to start with that. I know that the title factor XX is, and it's pretty obvious, all women, and they invited a woman to moderate. And I think that's great. I think it's fantastic that we do have an exhibition that includes all women. It's the one commonality that's the obvious one, but it was your very own curator who said that if you didn't know the artists were women, you wouldn't be able to tell it from the art. And so I want to keep going from there. We can all acknowledge that. It's great. These are incredibly accomplished women. And so we're going to talk about some of the other things that I feel are important. As I was preparing for this conversation, I started to group you guys. Like, okay, there's Sharon, Mary, Jenny. There's Nancy, Mel. There's Amy, Carol. There's Emily, Lorraine, Clary. And then there's Lee. Like, okay, she could go in column 2 or column 4, and then Mary could move over here and Carol come over there. So,
even roughly.
What? So I guess what I'd like to do is go back to that that possible conversation that's going on over in the museum, and have you guys talk about which work your work would be talking to, and what it might be saying. So Lee, since you're odd woman out, hello, what a horrible word.
Who would I like to have a conversation with?
What would your work be, who would you be talking to?
Who comes to mind is Clary, strangely enough. I mean, she and I have been bought by the same collectors, and our works hang in the same houses in a lot of places. And although it's not a walk in the park to look at that and think that, this is Jenny's holding up an image from which is sort of slightly misdirected. I mean, you can get a soupçon of what her work is from that image, but she's it's very interesting. We worked together in 2001 to 2003. I watched her sort of be born as an artist. She was doing figurative work with the resin on top. Then she found a grad school in, this is going to be a Clary celebration, too bad she's not here. She found a grad school in England online, and City and Guilds, which she could get an MFA for $11,000 instead of $30,000. And she went to London, and she rocks her socks off. She started with this series of little designs. She has a background as an architectural draftsman. She did some architecture, and I am an architect manqué, strangely enough. I was accepted to architecture school in 1972, and I didn't go. And that was like a dividing line for me. But I'm really interested in architectural scale and installation and how my work works in spaces. So one of the things that we've done together is this sort of random, it's like bringing organic energy into architectural spaces. And I think of it sometimes as female energy, but I think of it sometimes mostly as organic, sometimes soft, sometimes slightly out of control. But in this world of rectilinear forms and spaces, I really love to have my work go wild in there, and I think Chloe does the same thing. So
that's interesting. I'm not sure you would have ended up in that column of mine, so that's
And
fascinating.
probably
and architecture would never,
would never have entered into
right.
it. It's not obvious from her work, except she's doing these installations on the wall now that wrap walls. I wrote a catalog essay for, she had a big show at Cynthia Corbett Gallery in London, and she asked me to write a catalog essay for her. And I wrote a long essay, and I sent the draft to her, and it came back TMI, TMI, TMI. Don't tell everybody all my secrets, because I always believe in telling everything about process, because I figure people can't duplicate it. And if they understand about the process, then they'll just love it more.
Right.
So I'm not all over TMI, but anyway, so I think we're both engaged with process, with liquids that turn, that stop, you know, things that flow, and there are several people.
Well, and I'm going to get to that,
Yeah.
so let's wait on that a little bit.
Okay.
Because there is a whole process thing here that I think is equally important and interesting. Mel, what would you say about?
Well, I'm going to say something non-intuitive too, and say that actually I think my work and Mary's work is having an interesting conversation, because although Mary's work appears to be more organic, it's still very structural and has this shift between object and space that I think is really interesting, with something I like in my own work. And also that the material feels just the right color. Even if there's color added to your material, that it feels totally integrated into the forms. So that's who I hope one person, I mean, I of course want to have my work speak to everybody, but
Right.
I think it's a nice sort of
Yeah.
junction.
And Mary, would your works be speaking back?
It would.
Answering?
I couldn't even decide.
Too much time, right? Too much time.
There's so many interrelationships between the work, I feel, and you know, there's some obvious sort of material similarities with Sharon, but I do, it's interesting, you know, I agree with you, and I would say I would like to have a dialogue with Nancy's work, which is probably as different as possible. But I love the subtlety, the dimensionality of her work, and I'd love to learn from that, really. But I mean, I could say something about everyone, but if we can only choose one.
No, you can't,
Until the
because
second
they're all
round.
over there talking to each other a lot, so you don't have to just choose one. We can, it's a whole big conversation, so that's fine. And, you know, as many as, because I do feel like there is, there are some real common threads going through the entire exhibition. I mean, there's just this sensibility and this sort of overriding aesthetic. The whole show works so incredibly well together visually, and it can't just be about my four little columns. I know that. It really is about this, you know, chess set conversation thing that keeps moving around. So, Nancy.
Well, I was going to say, Mary, I'm also saying, I mean, one thing is, we didn't all know each other before this show, which has been really great, getting to know these other artists. But in just talking with Carol, just before the talk now, both of our work is very reductive and abstract forms, but when you were talking to me, you're coming from a very completely different place than where I am. I mean, my work is much more about perception, visual perception, and yours is abstract, but